Dear viewers and members of International Council for Industrial Security, Safety and Management, it is festival time. In advance, I wish to extend my greetings, good wishes, and blessings for safe and happy time ahead. From now on till we celebrate New Year, in India, it is long list of celebrations, long list of festivals. May you remain happy and healthy and always ahead of change curve. The change curve which makes you take stock of developments in professional fields, take note of those positive things which are happening around us and consolidate your position. As security professionals, it is our duty to bring new things, new tricks, new technologies, new tactics, and new strategies. All these to make benefit of emerging opportunities. And if it is a business worth doing, then it is worth doing profitably. If you are not earning the desired profit, it has got no meaning. How we remain ahead of the curve, how we remain in position where opportunities are to the best of our benefits. I bring to you an expert, and Manan Batra is expert. Welcome, Manan, and let me introduce you to our viewers. Friends, you must have seen Manan Batra very silently and very diligently working during our annual seminar, which took place in May uh, at Delhi. He was the actual force behind giving such a successful event. He was coordinator. He was arranging thousand things, not only administratively but also intellectually. The long list of key speakers, long list of moderators, long list of guests. It is all because of his hard work, and event was successful. So say all the where we bring topical subjects important for professionalizing the professionals. So you are the change maker. Welcome you to this discussion. And once again, I want to draw our viewers' attention to certain things. And those things are which we must remember. And these are the things which make us somehow relevant in the chosen profession. As end user, I have experience, and as service providers, many of our members, many of our viewers must have realized that today's customer is very finicky, very slippery, very demanding, and yet you are most of the time not aware what is going on in his mind, whether he appreciates your service, whether he would like to continue with your service, that is not known. For two reasons, that your customer is not very communicative, and second thing is that as a service provider, you are not very receptive to ideas or you do not open the communication channels. So taking the client feedback and retaining the client is always a big challenge. It is both way negative development, because as service provider you lose a good client, you lose good business, and as you end user, uh, client retention techniques and strategies are not exploited. That's why, as end user, you are not very comfortable continuing with the existing services, and they would like to experiment, try newer bouquet in the offering. How to retain client? Client retention strategies are very important. Today, it is PSC who should get up and take note of today's discussion, because especially it is aimed to private security agencies, those service providers, because if they spend time and energy searching for newer clients, it is always better because it takes less energy, less time to retain existing customer. So, Manan, I will request you to make your opening comment and let us see how focused and beneficial this approach is going to be for PSA. Your time now.
Absolutely, sir. First of all, thank you so much, Captain SB Tyagi. Thank you so much, ICISSM, for this platform and this opportunity to speak on this professionally pertinent topic. And I congratulate the viewers who are joining us live and even those who will be watching this in future, because this is a step in the right direction. As Captain Tyagi rightly alluded to the problem of clients getting lost in the private security industry in India, it is very important that as industry players we focus our attention on things which make one, business sense, and two, are profitable, are healthy for your bottom line. Otherwise there are enough and more strategies that can be tried in the market, but eventually one can run out of profits, leading to running out of cash, and then an unfortunate end to the business. This is something that we want to avoid. This is something that we want to prepare for. And our aim here is to become industry leaders. And client retention is a big white space, especially in the private security industry in India. And this is where we are going to start from today. So, Captain Tyagi, we can start with the presentation and we can move forward. So, client retention strategies for private security agencies. First and the foremost thing, right? Plan and strategy are two words which are used interchangeably, but that is not really the case. So, I want to lay out certain expectations for this discussion today. And that I'll do by differentiating between what a plan is versus what a strategy is, and why we are going to talk about strategy today and not so much about planning. So, a plan is basically resource allocation, and that kind of resource allocation which is in your control. So I've given an example here that, for example, you say that I'm going to market my services through Facebook ads with a budget of 5,000 rupees per day. Now, this is a plan because this is resource allocation and this is in your control, and which is why this is more comfortable, and this is the reason why more people go for planning rather than strategizing. Now, what is strategy then? So, strategy, on the other hand, is a competitive outcome that you wish to achieve, which will eventually lead the customers wanting your product or service. I'll explain that again with an example. Then let's say you now say that I'm going to market myself in a way where I leverage the psychological traits of scarcity and urgency so that my TG perceives me as a luxury brand and wants to buy from me. Now you understand the critical difference. In planning, you were just allocating resources and going ahead with it. In strategy, you are focusing on the outcome. What is the end outcome that I want to target? And to achieve that outcome, as per your strategy, there could be different plans. So today, as far as this discussion is concerned, I am only going to talk about strategy. Of course, I will give you examples of how planning can be included in this strategy. But once you have understood the strategy for client retention, you will be able to make your own plans, and those will be extremely strong and extremely effective, along with being financially viable for you. So let's go ahead, right? So the first thing to understand for us is the ultimate objective of client retention strategies. The ultimate objective of client retention strategies is to break this vicious circle of distrust. Now, what is this vicious circle of distrust? I'll explain. This starts with this position where the end client does not trust the private security agency. Now, there could be different reasons. Maybe we can discuss that in a different setting or a conversation. But the reality is that the end client does not trust the PSA as a value adding partner. That leads to a disagreement. What kind of disagreement? Let's say that the PSA, the private security agency, recommends that to adequately secure the client's facility, they will have to deploy 10 guards. But since the client does not trust the PSA because the client knows that the PSA is trying to maximize their revenue by deploying the maximum number of resources, the client comes back saying that, let's go ahead and do this with lesser number of guards. Let's say do this in 6 guards or 7 guards. This recommendation is often arbitrary, but this leads to a compromise. What kind of compromise? The PSA has to agree to the client's demand, and there is a reason for that. The reason is that the private security industry in India is extremely competitive. So a PSA who's making a recommendation for 10 guards is getting a suggestion from the end client to deploy only 7 guards. If they refuse to comply with that recommendation, there are 5 more PSAs right outside the client's gate who are willing to do the job in, let's say, 5 or even 4 guards, which is why the existing PSA, out of the fear of losing this business, has to compromise. So now a security which needed 10 guards to be deployed is being secured by only 6 guards. So if you have, there is a fundamental concept in business, and we'll discuss this in the forthcoming slides as well, that garbage in means garbage out. If you have bad quality input, the output will also be bad in quality, which is what happens. So you had distrust, which led to disagreement, which led to a compromise, and this compromise leads to a bad output. Now, of course, the security which needed 10 guards to start with is being secured with only 6 guards. So there will be gaps in the security, which eventually the end client will pinpoint to the security provider, to the security agency in this case, that this was your job to secure my facility 100%, but you failed at your job, which will again further lead to distrust. And this validates the client's initial position that they were right to not trust the PSA. And this vicious circle keeps going and going and going. And there's nobody who's gaining anything out of it. So, talking about, losers, who is the loser here? Both the end client and the private security agency are losers here, because the end client, of course, suffers due to inadequate security. The PSA suffers because now they have lost the business, because eventually they will be replaced, because the end client feels that the existing PSA is not effective enough, so I must replace them. And as I said, due to the competitive nature of the private security industry, there are enough and more PSAs to replace them. So both the end client will lose and the PSA will lose. But who loses more is the question. In this case, it is the PSA. Why? Because one, the PSA loses existing business. So whatever they have spent in acquiring that client, that has now gone to waste. Second is the PSA can now never increase prices, because now they have been commoditized to an extent where they have to operate with minimal margins. And the moment they want to increase their prices, they risk getting replaced by a cheaper alternative, right? And then, of course, this threat of replacement exists. What is important to notice that all this is happening, that this weak bargaining power for the PSA is happening because there is distrust. So again, coming back to the ultimate objective of client retention strategy, it is to break this circle of distrust and create massive trust with the client, so that even before they think of replacing you, they have to think 10 times, because they will not be able to forge that kind of trust with anybody else. And that is when that becomes your USP, that becomes your differentiator, and you become irreplaceable, right? So now, focusing on client retention makes financial sense. I've been saying that, right? First, I'll discuss this analogy of a leaky bucket. Let's assume that you have to go 5 kilometers to a river to fill a bucket of water. And every time you fill that bucket of water, there are leaks in the bucket which causes the water to flow out. And by the time you come back to your source destination, the bucket is only half full. So every time you go 5 kilometers to the river, then come back 5 kilometers to the source destination, expecting that the bucket will always be full, it will never happen as long as the leaks are plugged. This is the same with client retention. As long as you are losing clients, as long as you are losing revenue, you will not be able to optimize your top line, no matter how many new clients you acquire. And I'll also show that to you with an Excel model that I have prepared, right? But before that, how cheap is client retention versus client acquisition, right? So it's a known fact that retaining an existing client is much cheaper and therefore profitable than acquiring a new one. On an average, it is 5 to 20 times cheaper retaining a client versus acquiring a new one, right? Now, the second fact in the private security industry context is that majority of the business that we get here is referral based. Having a website, having a marketing plan, is a good to have, but having a referral is a must have. Now, why would a client who does not trust you 100% refer you in their network? Which is why it becomes even more important to focus on client retention and focus on that trust building, so that the existing client not only keeps working with you, but also opens their own network for you, right? The third point here is that there are different quality of clients that a PSA services. There are good quality clients, there are mediocre clients, and there are bad quality clients. The circle of influence is structured as such that good quality clients will have more good quality clients in their own networks. For example, our Captain Tyagi is from a defense services background, so you can expect him to have more people from similar background in his network. This is the case with your clients as well. So good quality client will have more good quality clients in their network, but they will only open up their network as I've multiple times stated, that only if they are 100% satisfied with your services and they trust you 100%, right? So in this context, let's move ahead. And before we get into, we are slowly and steadily coming to the client retention strategy. But before that, it is extremely important that we are able to visualize where do we stand in terms of client retention. How good or bad are our client retention practices? So there are some quantifiable metrics. I'll focus on four of those in this particular slide, right? First is retention rate. Now, how is retention rate calculated? It is basically E minus N divided by S into 100. What is E? E is the ending number of customers you have after a particular period of time. N is the new clients that you acquired during that period of time. And S is the starting number of clients that you had. This will give you a percentage, and as per best practices, as per the industry average, a client retention rate of anything more than 85% is considered as good enough. Do you as a PSA know what your client retention rate is? Ask yourself that. The second metric is churn rate. Churn rate is like the step brother of retention rate. It is simply 1 minus retention rate. So whatever you retain, whatever you lose becomes your churn rate. So by that logic, the industry averages a churn rate of less than 15% is considered acceptable, right? Now, before I move on to the other two metrics, I will walk you through the Excel model that I was referring to. So in this Excel model, you can see that I have created a fictitious PSA, right? What this PSA does is that it acquires 10 new clients each month. The client retention rate for this PSA is 60%, and by that logic, the churn rate is 40%. The average revenue per client that this PSA earns is 1 lakh rupees per month, and the average profitability per client is 7%, which is usually the service charge that is charged. Now, CAC as percent revenue is 10%. What is CAC? CAC is the customer acquisition cost. So basically, what we are saying here is to acquire a client which is giving you a revenue of 1 lakh per month, you have to make a one-time investment of 10% of that monthly revenue, which is 10,000 rupees. Retention cost as opposed to CAC is only 2%, because as we have already discussed, that retaining a client is 5x cheaper than acquiring a new one, which is why it is only 2%, which is 5 times cheaper than 10%. Now, how is the client base structured? We calculate the clients at the beginning of the period, then the new clients acquired during the period, the clients churned, and that gives us the end result as to how many clients do we have, right? And this is basically an income statement, which I'll come to later. Now, this model is structured to represent a picture of one full year. So this has 12 months. Now I'll show you the other 12 months, right? So this can still become a little overwhelming for people, but I'll tell you where you have to focus, right? You just have to focus on this particular row where you see clients at the end of the period. Now, as and when month by month the PSA is acquiring new clients, you see that the clients are increasing from 10 to 16 to 19 to 21 to 22 to 23 in month 6. But what has happened now? What has happened is that the clients are no more increasing from 23. So for all the remaining months, you see that the PSA is only stuck with 23 clients. And that is because there are clients which are being churned out. So even though the PSA is acquiring 10 more new clients each month, they are still not growing. Their business is stagnating. This is what the point is. This is what is important to note, that just by keeping on acquiring new clients and not focusing on client retention, you can still end up in stagnation. So if there is stagnation in client base, there of course will be stagnation in revenue. As you see, the revenue is stuck here at 23 lakhs. And then accordingly, there will be stagnation in your bottom line also, which is only a 35,000 profit. You are stuck here. The other thing to note is, right, if we have, let's say, different values of client retention rate. So in this particular scenario, which I showed to you, the client retention rate was 60%, remember? Now, let's say we were to incorporate certain practices which would have helped us improve this client retention rate by just 5%. So we go from 60% to 65% client retention rate. The jump in revenue is 10%, not 5%. So you are getting more bang for the buck. So each dollar or each rupee that you invest in bettering your client retention is giving you more bang for the buck, because you are getting a more than proportional increase. And this gets even accentuated when you look at your profit. Same, when your client retention rate moves from 60% to 65%, the profitability, the profit in absolute terms has increased by 44%, which is a big jump. So does this not make financial sense? I leave that answer to you. Now let's jump back to our presentation. Here we have already discussed the two metrics, retention rate, churn rate. I've also shown you how they look in a financial model and why client retention makes financial sense. Moving on, the third metric is CSAT, which is basically customer satisfaction score. Now it is simple to calculate, right? It is basically number of satisfied clients divided by total number of respondents into 100. But the catch here is, how do you determine whether a client is satisfied or not? And this is where client retention starts becoming more of an art than a science, because satisfaction is a elusive figure that you are chasing. So your process of determining whether or not a client is really satisfied is what will make the critical difference. As for an industry average, a CSAT between 75 to 85% is considered good enough. The last and the most important, one of the most important metrics in my opinion for client retention is NPS, which is Net Promoter Score. This is something that you would have seen in multiple of your service providers like Paytm or Jio, etc., where at the end of a transaction, they will ask you, how likely are you to recommend our services to your network? Rate us on 1 to 10. That is how they calculate Net Promoter Score. So the formula is simple, which is percent promoters minus percent detractors, and a score of 30 to 50 is good enough. But this score will tell you how likely are your clients willing to recommend you in their networks. And this is exactly what we have spoken about, right? Good quality clients have good quality networks. So if you open up that network for yourself, that will be your biggest win. So essentially, you have to focus on why, what, why, how. Why are you calculating a certain metric? What is the value of that certain metric for you? Why is the value what it is, and how can you improve that value? This forms base of your strategy. Why, what, why, how. Now coming to the client retention strategy, along with the plans that I have prepared for you, right? And this is just one of the strategies that I have in mind, even though I feel that this is the only strategy that you will need. But you are free to plan accordingly, but keep the overarching strategic theme in mind, right? I'm calling it the surgical strike for client retention. It is like finding a needle in a haystack, right? So as a business owner, you do everything from, let's say, sales, from HR, from payroll management, from compliance, from finance, and everything in between. So nobody can expect that, you have a carpet bombing kind of an approach where you can, solve the problems for every client in one go. That is frankly not going to work. You must do a surgical strike, right? The concept of garbage in, garbage out is applicable here. So therefore, if your inputs are smart, your outputs will be smart too. Now, what do we mean by smart? Smart is what we talk in the context of setting smart goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So you have to ensure that the inputs are smart in the hopes for getting a smart output. And how you collect these inputs must display the following three attributes that will result in the generation of massive trust. Do not forget, my friends, that the end goal of any client retention strategy or a plan that you use is to generate massive trust with your client. Only then will you be able to grow. So what are these three attributes? These three attributes are proactivity, authenticity, and predictability. Now let's move further. So what is step one? Step one is collecting intel. Now I know that it's a cliche that, best is to just listen to your clients and solve their problems, or best is to collect feedback from your clients and solve their problems. I'm also going to suggest the same, that collect feedback, but understand that collecting feedback is an art. Now I could very easily create a 25 to a 30 question long Google form and send it across to my client. Do you think that the output I will receive will be meaningful, will be smart? Absolutely not. Which is why I said that your inputs have to be smart if you are hoping that your outputs are smart as well. So you have to be really, really into the process. You really have to be thoughtful about how you are collecting this feedback. In a country where, in a country like India, where we are non-native English speakers, do you think if I have a very complicated question laid out on my feedback form, the client will be able to understand it properly and give me an accurate answer or a response? Absolutely not. And since the output will be useless or inaccurate, if you make deductions based on those on that kind of an output, your end result will also be useless or inaccurate, right? So collecting feedback is an art. The parameters on which you have to collect feedback must be smart and must be collected scientifically. Now again, the act of collecting feedback, side by side, when you are collecting feedback, it has to signal to your client that you are showing these three attributes. You must focus that these three attributes are highlighted in this process as well. So the three attributes here are again proactivity, authenticity, and predictability. Proactivity is that you need not wait for things to go wrong to go out and ask for feedback from the client. You must be proactive in hearing out your client. Authenticity is divided into two things here, which is one, unbiasedness and accountability. So let's say you are really willing to improve and you are really focused on client retention and you are hearing out your client, but the client tells you that this particular service is not working as per my expectations, but you as the business owner could be a little biased towards your own business, and rightfully so. Or you could be biased that the client does not understand what goes in the back end, which is why they will not be able to understand why this particular problem cannot be solved. No, unbiasedness is really, really important. So a simple solution to this is could be hiring a third party, and that could be a great signal for your client that whoever I'm speaking to, whoever I'm giving the feedback to, is going to be unbiased. The second thing is accountability, which means that once feedback has been collected, it must be acted upon with sincerity. Just getting the results with you is not enough. You have to act on the issues that have been identified. And predictability is that the feedback cycle and the next steps must be something that the client can expect to happen. It shouldn't come off as a surprise that, today morning I ring up a client telling them that, boss, I want your feedback today. That is not going to work because there is no predictability in that. And once there is no proactivity, authenticity, or predictability, there is no trust. So keep this in mind. Step two is the strike. This is where action happens, right? And which is why I've said execution is king. Now, the output of this step will be largely determined by the quality of feedback you have collected in step one. Because if you have collected quality feedback from the client and you have analyzed it properly, because it was collected scientifically in the first place, you would be able to pinpoint the pain areas of the client. And then you will also be able to prioritize those areas in terms of the urgency and the intensity of resolution that is required. And that is what is going to make magic happen, because you will know exactly what to solve and exactly when to solve and exactly how to solve. And once you are able to do that, boom, extreme client delight, which translates into massive trust. And that is what we are aiming for. And here also, the three attributes must be demonstrated. Proactivity, you must proactively address all issues. You must not keep sitting on the feedback you have collected. Authenticity is that the attempt of addressing these issues should be genuine, and that genuinity should be visible, right? It should not happen that you identify a particular issue, but half-heartedly you try to address that issue, because all these things translate into that distrust, which causes that distrust circle to form. We don't want that. And then, of course, we have predictability, where the communication to the client should be such that they know what to expect in terms of results. Basically, they should know what is it that you will be able to resolve, what is it that you will not be able to resolve. That is the predictability that they should have. Nobody is asking you to get them the moon or the stars. What the client really needs is that you say that this is what I'm going to give you, and then you give them that. That is predictability, right? And of course, I missed this point in authenticity, that there is a small tactic that can be employed here. It's called a sacrificial lamb or a ghost product strategy, or a tactic, where what you do is, let's say you do a security survey of a site and you realize that, along with deploying X number of guards, there will be need for a electronic surveillance setup where there will be a need for cameras with video analytics capability. So you can tell that client that I don't have this capability, but there are enough and more vendors in the market who can help you out with this. In this way, you have told the client that you are willing to not do the work that is not your core competency. This again will develop that massive trust with your client, because the client now knows, okay, this person really cares about the value that they are providing to me. This person really cares about my money, which is why they are saying, don't buy from us, buy from somebody else who's an expert. This creates massive trust. So as I said, these three attributes are the key. The last step of this strategy and this plan is doubling down. Doubling down is simple, right? If you have maintained the quality of inputs in the previous two steps, then by this step, you will be able to clearly identify what is working well for a client, what is not. And once that is done, double down on what is working well and eliminate what is not working well. As simple as that. But here's a word of caution, which you can see on the screen as well, that there is no one size fits all in business. This means that what is working well for client A might not work as well for client B, and what is not working well for client B might not work as well for client A. So you have to have that kind of personalization. You have to really understand the client as an individual. You cannot create a basket of solutions and then again use that carpet bombing approach. It has to be a surgical strike. As I said, these three attributes, proactivity, authenticity, predictability, have to be included here. So proactivity, how do you do that? Make yourself so good at learning that you are always ahead of the curve. You and I both know that the private security industry is going to undergo massive transformation in the coming years. And one of the key drivers of this transformation is going to be technology. So as PSAs, it becomes your job to start taking control of the narrative, and that will require for you to learn, upskill, upgrade in terms of the new technologies that are evolving. But once you do that, you will become an industry leader, because there will be no competitor who is as good as you in taking stock of that narrative. Second is authenticity. The intent to keep the client's interest paramount must be distinctly visible. As I said earlier, also the signaling has to be so strong and so visible that the client genuinely receives the messaging that you are trying to put forth. For example, if you hire a third party to do to do whatever for you, the client knows that this PSA is as invested in this association as I am. He's not just here to make money out of me. He's here to genuinely provide me, great value. So that is how you establish authenticity. Then coming to predictability, the client must know what you are capable of, why you are doing it, and how you are doing it, right? What you are capable of, why you are doing it, and how you are going to do it. And here, one critical element is also the problem of where, the guards keep changing. Clients do not appreciate that, because that takes away the predictability, which leads to distrust. So you as a PSA don't want to do that. As far as possible, to whatever extent, please try and ensure that the predictability is sacrosanct, is maintained, the sanctity of that is maintained by keeping the same team which has been deployed. That is just one of the examples. There are enough and more things that you can do to maintain predictability. So these are the three steps, and I do understand that it could have appear to as a little it could have come across as a little fragmented, but in the next slide everything will come together, because that's how strategies are, right? They are complicated, they are nuanced, but they tie back to one output that you are hoping for. So as we have discussed, the three core attributes of our client retention strategy: proactivity, authenticity, and predictability. To summarize, In the plan that I shared with you, proactivity must be demonstrated in collecting feedback, addressing identified issues, and learning evolving industry trends. Authenticity must be demonstrated in listening to what the client has to say, resolving issues and shortcomings, and demonstrating client obsession and centricity. As I am saying again and again, signaling and a clear signaling is very, very important. And predictability must be demonstrated in feedback collection as to when and how the feedback will be collected, the timelines of actions once the feedback has been collected, and the possibilities of what can be done, and by extension of that, what cannot be done. Once this is happen, once this happens, and your inputs are smart, because we have been speaking about that as well. This will lead to you being able to conduct that smart surgical strike. And once you are able to conduct that smart surgical strike month over month over month, this will lead to you being established as a trusted partner. And this is what we were aiming for, that our client retention strategy has to generate massive trust. And once you have established this massive trust, this will lead to you becoming a client retention magnet. The client will never think of going away. The client will never think of replacing you. And this will, of course, lead to massive growth when the client starts referring you and continuing to do more business with you. And once they trust you, they will also, by the way, agree to price increases, resource increases, and whatever else that you have to pitch for them. So upselling and cross selling also opens up once that trust has been established. So this is largely what I had to say. This is a summary slide which brings everything together. I hope this made sense. And Captain Tyagi, I'll back to you.
So by now, going through your presentation, I gather that the whole lot of PSA, they go to the market and conventionally flaunt their USP to be the cheapest,
Right.
will be very detrimental to their business growth. Because when you tell your potential client that in tendering we have been L1, that doesn't mean that you are the most preferred chosen one because of your strength on providing the services uh, professionally and competently and successfully.
Absolutely.
PSAs now need to change their strategy and focus on customer retention strategies. Manan, you have been very thorough, and through your presentation, you made a point that it will be beneficial for PSAs to invest bit of their profit for generation of more profits. And it
Absolutely.
makes sense. It makes sense to engage professionals who would do the analysis, who would do the survey, who would collect the customer feedback and present it to the PSA so that they understand. Ultimately, for the businessman, making profit is not only legitimate outcome of their business, it is also very prudent for forward-looking businessmen to realize that retaining customer is beneficial than searching new customer. And
Absolutely.
when they send their business or marketing team to potential customer, it will serve them right if they do the exercise beforehand. Not only when your existing customer is going for renewal of the contract, because that time they must be armed with the sufficient feedback, data, and the facts which their customer would understand.
Absolutely.
The customer would be driven by the one single element, that is return on investment. So, through your exercise, which you mentioned in your presentation, how important is return on investment for customer, and how it would link for PSA's exercise to engage and continue engaging same customer. So your take on this?
Oh, absolutely, sir. Very valid points and very valid questions raised. So before I answer your question, I will add to the fact that you pointed about on renewals, right? So a lot of people believe that renewals happen at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year, but that is not true. The decision to renew or not renew happens when the client really faces a problem and how that problem is addressed. That is where the decision to renew or not renew happens. And for the PSA to understand that this is where the decision is happening is paramount. Now coming to your question, sir, see, we should always, as businessmen, we should always seek to establish win-win situations. So here, who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are the end client and the PSA, and of course the third party who's involved. Let's say the PSA engages a third party to do this job of client retention for them. So the PSA from their side has made that investment. Now how will they earn their return? They will earn the return when the client is one retained, and second one when the client starts referring them to more good quality clients in their network. And it will be a massive return on the minuscule investment that they'll have to make. Second thing is, how will the end client benefit from this process? The end client will benefit because now they are not losing time, effort, and money in switching different security providers, because that also comes at a cost to the end client, right? Now they can have those three attributes: proactivity, authenticity, and predictability in the security vendor that they had initially started with, and that frees up their mind space and their resources to work on other business decisions which are probably more important than just focusing on, okay, today I have one PSA, tomorrow I'll have to replace it and have another PSA, because that in itself is also an exercise. So both the stakeholders here end up in a winning situation is what I believe.
So back to the point, Manan, back to the point on ROI. Why I mention it, because my all professional, service to the fraternity was from the perspective of end user,
Right.
and as head of security, I would go to the management to take the budget approval.
Mm-hmm.
All the time when existing contract is to be renewed with the same party, my management will ask the question, how beneficial and how profitable would it be to continue with the same agency? Because they want to see verifiable, quantifiable results. And when PSA, when they go to the client asking for retention, renewal of their existing contract, it would be advisable for PSA to beforehand work out ROI, because that way they will be helping with their counterpart who is end user. They provide the service to someone who is head of the department, who needs to get the approval, budget approval, and he needs to be ready for the facts and figures. And if PSAs already know and share with their existing client that, gentlemen, this is how we are going to be beneficial if you continue with us, because these are the facts, these are the data which you can share with the management, how we became integral part of your total loss prevention program, how we could support your profitability, because a business must also be focusing on productivity, and productivity is linked to profitability. So I suppose that anyone who is approaching PSA and talking about the program which you propagate to the environment of PSAs, that do this, and there are experts available. So somewhere
Absolutely.
a component needs to be figured out in the entire exercise. So what would be your approach to PSA when you advocate that it is part of their strategy that you make your case like this?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So, what the PSAs must do is one, start tracking the CSAT and the NPS that I've mentioned. CSAT, again, for the benefit of everybody, CSAT is the client satisfaction metric, and NPS is the net promoter score. So, let's say for a moment we only talk about CSAT here, right? Not only the PSA should be able to track and calculate and measure CSAT, they should be able to do so across time periods. Because then, let's say they are on a contract which is 3 months long, and across those 3 months, if the CSAT has constantly gone up, which means that, in month one, they collected feedback, they identified issues, they rectified those issues, and as a result of that, the client satisfaction increased. So let's say client satisfaction was 60% in the first month, second month it went on to 70%, and third month it went on to 80%. So when the time for renewal comes, the PSA will be able to demonstrate, that these were the activities that we did to hear you out, to listen to you actively. These were the things that we were able to identify through this process. These were the things that we rectified in these timelines, and in this magnitude. And as a result of that, your feedback has only improved. So now the client cannot come back and say that, whatever you did was not satisfactory, because you have that on paper, because you have that in your dashboard, that the CSAT metric has improved. Accordingly, NPS, accordingly customer efficiency score, and there are tons of metrics that the PSA will have to start tracking, analyzing, and not just tracking and analyzing for one time period, but across time period. And when the time for renewal comes, as part of their renewal application, this report, this dashboard should also be shown to the end client, so that the end client is also able to visualize very, very clearly that yes, this particular PSA has worked on my recommendations, on my feedback, and I have in fact only told them that I am more and more satisfied, so I must renew.
Yeah, Manan, in fact, as you can see on screen, there is very positive and strong comment by Garima Goswami, and she is very clear, and she shares your approach, your focus, and she is very clear that productivity, authenticity, and predictability is well explained by you, and that is very clearly shown in the end slide of your presentation. And this says that make your PSA simply the best. Nothing can be better than this closing statement. And I know, for the benefit of our viewers, if I am permitted to summarize the whole presentation in bullet form, you have mentioned about the quality service, you have mentioned about the communication which customer and PSA need to engage regularly. You mentioned about customized solutions, training and development, and account management. You have highlighted technology integration, because more and more customers are going to ask the PSA to also provide to them the technological solutions.
Right.
They will also would be happily engaging them in risk assessment and advisory services. Customer
Absolutely.
feedback is a core point in today's discussion, and finally, it leads to loyalty program and industry certification. Good company. If you are good, service provider, naturally you are kept in very good books of your network and your industry peers. So finally, with these bullet points, I feel very happy that finally another point came, which has come from Rajiv Mathur, and I'm sure you would be happy to respond to that. And this comment from Rajiv Mathur is that, of course, he commends you for excellent insight and very innovative he found this discussion, keeping in mind that few organizations do not continue with the PSA for more than 3 years. What would be your recommendation to PSA to stay engaged with a particular aspect, that they would like to discontinue the service after 3 years? They would experiment with the new service provider. So, what do you say about it?
Right, sir. So, I mean, before I respond to Rajiv sir's question, I will also take this opportunity to, thank Garima for her kind words, and thank you, Rajiv sir, for the encouragement as well. Now, coming to your question, right? So, sir, there are one or two things that can be done about it. One is that there needs to be an RCA, root cause analysis, done. That why is it that the end client is working with this policy? Why do they want to replace their security provider in 3 years? Is there a precedence in the past where a service provider, where a security provider who continued for more than 3 years became an insider threat for them? You know, which again would tell me that there is some degree of distrust, which is why no matter the quality of services, no matter the the other things related to your services, they still want to replace you. They still want to move you out, which tells me that there is a degree of distrust, and what needs to be done is to find reasons for that distrust. And once those reasons have been found out, they can be addressed, and the end client could also be nudged to change policies, right? If they are really satisfied with a particular security provider and they really trust them, they would at least be open to the idea of considering a policy change. Second thing, sir, and that I speak as an entrepreneur, as a business professional, is that as business professional, we will always be constrained on resources. By that I mean is that no matter how good we are, we will only be able to serve or service a limited number of clients. So that being said, if you have clients, let's say in your pool of clients, there is a client who has this very rigid policy that they will move you out in 2 to 3 years, versus you have a client who does not have this kind of policy, but they are still good clients for you, then focus more on those clients who do not have this kind of policy. And that also you will know once you start looking into your own client metrics, which will tell you what kind of client is good quality, what kind of client is bad quality, and where do you want to invest most of your resources on. For example, when I speak about 360 PSA, the 360 here means that I only intend to work with 360 private security agencies across India, because I know that I will always be constrained on resources and I can only do quality work with a limited number of people. So that is what
Okay,
my
right. Next observation comes from Man Dagar. And of course, he compliments you and by proxy me also. And he makes a point that private security agencies, security persons are officially getting good training from any government organizations or get trained by private institute. That is the comment from Man Dagar. But I'm sure that this statement is made keeping the mandatory requirement of Private Security Agency Regulation Act, and that is elementary, very basic, and that training is just bare minimum to start their profession, but to remain ahead of the curve or top of the pyramid, they need to do thousand things differently, and one thing which is different is discussed by you. So I suppose that at this point we need to close the discussion, and
right.
thank you for sparing your time and the effort, the paradigm changing approach for PSA. because they cannot remain complacent on keeping 10% customer leaving their services and hoping to get 15% more. But ultimately, I think mathematics, in which I am very poor, would suggest that it is a very bad approach, because their focus, their energy, and time is spent on engaging, searching for new customer, and every effort would result into business is no guarantee in today's world. So retaining good customer is paramount important for every PSA. I hope that PSA has taken note of today's discussion, and just very quick closing remark from you, Manan.
Sir, I will only summarize it in one phrase or line, is that please don't be a leaky bucket. Preserve all the water in your bucket by focusing on client retention. And thanks a lot, Captain Tyagi and ICISSM for this platform and the opportunity.
So, viewers, I, as in the beginning mentioned, take this opportunity once again to wish you all the very best, and whole range of festivities around us. My sincere desire and wish and hope is that everyone remains safe, sound, and secure. Remain in touch, remain happy, remain healthy, and let there be prosperity. धन की वर्षा हो, समृद्धि आए, सुख आए, शांति आए, ऐसा मेरा सभी के साथ शुभकामनाएं और विश्वास है. जहां भी रहें आप स्वस्थ रहें, प्रसन्न रहें. Thank you very